Well, good morning if you are in Chihuahua in Mexico, for example. Good afternoon if you are somewhere in New York State in mid-October. Today is October 11th of 2024. Good evening if you are in Trento in northern Italy, a place I know very, very well and where my guest was born. Greetings to people all around the world, and welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. My guest today is the busiest woman in opera, maybe the busiest person in opera, but definitely the busiest woman in opera. Her name is Paola Prestini, and as the name suggests to you, she's Italian by birth, but I think she's a woman of the world. I think we're going to find out that she is as American and as North American, I think, as she is Italian, and maybe we're going to learn a lot more. But Paola, in the 2024-2025 season, has an astonishing 5 world premiere operas that is happening when, Wagner and Beethoven labored forever. You're more in the tradition, I guess, of Donizetti and Rossini, fertile Italian geniuses who si dà da fare, as the Italians say. They give themselves work to do,
Exactly. Si danno da
and
fare.
dà da fare. So, benvenuta, welcome, Paola. And
Grazie.
I want to start by asking you some background because, as I said, I know Trento very well. One of my best friends lives there. It's a city I really do know. I love the food. I love everything about Trento. Um, you were born in Trento or in the province of Trentino, let's call it.
I was born in Trento.
Okay, talk about that very beautiful city.
Oh, it's such a gorgeous city. So, I mean, Trento is considered one of the kind of most pristine, if you will, cities in Italy. It's very environmentally friendly. It's considered one of the big beauties. The entire, like all the floor of the city, or much of the floor, is in marble. So it's this kind of extraordinary place. And I was born there. Both of my parents were from there. And my father, who makes reed instruments and who makes musical instruments, moved the business to the border of Mexico, which is why we moved to the United States. But my mother actually now lives half the year still in now in Veneto, in the
Mhm.
Dolomites, and I
Where
still have the.
exactly?
It's in a small town called Falcade. So she splits her time between the United States, Arizona, and Falcade.
They
And
could not be more different.
they couldn't be more different. And I think that's also in me, is all these kind of experiences of growing up in radically different places informs a lot of the way I think, and of course the way I write, and the way I operate in
Well,
the world.
just a brief mention of the Veneto, the Dolomites. There's a town in Italian called Dobbiaco or Toblach in German, where Gustav Mahler went in the latter summers of his life and composed his late works there, the Eighth Symphony, the Ninth, Das Lied von
I
der
know it
Erde.
well.
And I do too. It's a beautiful spot. Talk
Gorgeous.
about specifically Dolomite Mountains as opposed to Alps, because
Well,
even the
yeah.
acoustics of that area are very different from the Alps.
I mean, the Dolomites are astounding. They're a very specific type of rock formation. And where my mother lives is actually fortunately not touristy. So our summers are, often picking mushrooms, hiking, going on really, really long hikes throughout the Dolomite area. And it's an extraordinary region. She's in the Veneto, so it's about an hour and a half north of Venice, near a town called Belluno, and she's kind of made that home now, and we often visit Trento, obviously, when we're there, because it's just everything is quite close when you're there.
So that's also Belluno in that area is where Titian was from nearby, and Lorenzo da Ponte was from that area. It's culturally magnificent. The famous town is Cortina d'Ampezzo with the skiing, and that will be the Olympics, I
Yes,
believe, in 28 or 26. I forget
and
when.
gorgeous, just very like very different because where my mom lives is actually like very local, and there
Yeah,
you get a lot of tourism because it's so
yeah.
stunning, you know. Yeah.
Um, you mentioned something that's very important to me that most people may have just heard it and go past. La raccolta dei funghi, the gathering of
See,
mushrooms, or the hunting for mushrooms, depending how you talk about it. The Italy, for people who don't know, is 20 regions, and Trento and Bolzano are the two capital cities of a region that's joined called Trentino Alto Adige. The Trentino is more Italianate, and the Alto Adige, also called Südtirol, is more Germanic. And they're very
exactly.
close to one another, and these are small places. But in Trentino, the police officers are trained mycology, in other words, mushroom experts.
I
And
love that.
I know from a lot of gathering that I would gather mushrooms in a place called Moena, that you know
Oh
probably.
yeah, I know it well.
Um,
Yeah.
and I would bring the mushrooms to the local police precinct, and they would say, "This is edible. This is safe. This is not safe. Throw that away." And um, it's the only place in the world where every police person has to know, be a mycologist to know enough about mushrooms so that no one dies eating the wonderful mushrooms that grow there. Did you know
Okay,
that?
that's amazing. I did not know that. I love
Yeah.
that so much. I love that. I mean, it is a it is a question of life and death, so it makes sense, but it's also just such a charming, like that's so Italian. You know, I
It
love
is
it.
very Italian. I mean, there are so many things we could say is very Italian. Another one of my favorites is historically, and I first went to Italy in 1973, and I've lived there for a long time, um, is that when you have a pet, it used to be that you'd go to the butcher shop and get bones or whatever
Yes.
for the pet or scraps of meat. In Italy, not always now, but in the past, if you had a pet, you'd go to the butcher shop to buy canned dog food or canned cat food.
Oh my gosh,
It
I
was
did not
not
know
sold
that.
in the supermarket. Now it is in
Right.
Esselunga and things like that. But in the past, you would buy your canned pet food in the butcher shop,
Oh my
which
gosh,
is,
I
as
love
we
it.
say, very, very Italian. I love it.
I
Um,
love it. I mean, that's yeah, that's the thing I love about visiting my mom is, you know, the verduraio, the macellaio, the
you
bread,
know,
you know, everything is its own unique person, which allows you to have those kinds of relationships, which are so
true.
meaningful in the day to day.
And I want to talk a little more about the city of Trento. Um, People may know it as Trent and
Yeah,
the famous
which of course
Council
was the Council of Trent. Yeah.
1563, which
Yeah.
was the reforms of the Catholic Church. It was where, after that, they became a little more strict, and the very elderly Michelangelo, 1 year away from death, saw a lot of his nudes covered up with discreet panties or whatever that were painted over by a guy named Daniele da Volterra who had to do the job. Um, and later these were removed. I forget the word, not bragante, bragate, but something that were like underwear painted
Oh
on the
my
nude of
gosh.
Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel.
I
But
mean, what I know about the Council of Trent, just from the musical side, is that that's where polyphony was saved. So that there was this kind of really interesting moment where, you know, people felt that polyphony took away from the Word of God, and so, you know, so that was really up for grabs, if you will. That if that hadn't gone well, this kind of complexity in choral writing, and you know, of course, the great tradition of choral writing in the church would have gone, you know, more monophonic,
I
more
did
one
not know
line.
that.
Glad that
Talk,
didn't happen.
please talk about polyphony for people who don't know and what that means for the history of music.
Yeah, so I mean, monophony is the idea that, you know, you're really carrying the word across in a very direct way and there's nothing competing against it. So it's one line that can be understood. And of course, the words take precedence. Whereas polyphony or counterpoint, if you will, slightly different, but basically the same, you know, this idea of multiple lines going on the same time to create a kind of more complex, if you will, fabric. And the idea, of course, in the church being that that would take away from the word of God because you were complicating things.
That's a wow for me.
Yeah.
That opens up. dimensions and whole galaxies of things to think about. Thank you, Paola. Wow.
No, absolutely. I mean, I love writing for the boys. So it's like
Yeah.
this idea. When I was at Juilliard, I was teaching 16th century counterpoint, and so I got to kind of really study, if you will, the background of counterpoint in general. So that's
Mhm.
why I know this kind of unknown little nugget.
And how old were you when you moved from Trentino in the northeastern Italy to the southwestern United States?
So I was very young. I was 2.5, and
Ah,
we moved to the yeah. So I was quite young. We moved to the border. We first moved actually to New York State, and then shortly after moved to Nogales, which is a small town on the border. It has a sister city, which is in Mexico, which is where my dad's business was, as well as in the United States on the Arizona side. And my dad still lives there to this day.
mhm.
And it's a very radically different place from northern Italy, not just in the kind of countryside, which is this very arid, beautiful but Sonoran desert, but also in terms of culture. You think about Trento, and there was a lot of culture in every single corner, and in on the border there's a different type of culture. It's just not kind of an arts culture, if you will. So that was something that was quite just a real shock, if you will. I think specifically for my mom. My dad, in a way, is it got under his skin faster, so he made it
Right.
home right away.
Would you give a little bit of it, just a little bit of a guideline of the story of your opera Silent Light that I saw on September 26th here in Brooklyn? In Brooklyn, I'm not in Brooklyn. Um, but just a bit so we can understand the border area and how that might contrast with other places.
Absolutely. So Silent Light is based on a film by the Mexican filmmaker Carlos Regalas. It premiered and with huge accolades, considered by many to be one of the best films of the 20th century, but of course was an art film, so not seen so much. The story follows a very strict Mennonite family in northern Mexico. So already a society that is quite, insular is now even further insular, because there's this kind of double, if you will, insularity. And it follows the betrayal of a father who has, his 5 children and a husband named Johann, who's married to a woman named Esther, who he loves very deeply. And this finds him several years into an affair with a woman named Marianne. Um, this is not a story of judgment. It's a story of good people who and exploring, if you will, the canvas of the inner world of these characters. And so you zero in into what this affair has done to an entire family, and you get to kind of see the inner worlds of each of the people in this kind of intimate circle. This further is kind of then encapsulated by the community, which is played by a choir. And so with the choir, you also understand, if you will, what community means in Mennonite culture and what family means, if you will, to the community.
Thank you.
I'll
That's
tell you one
exactly
more
right.
thing.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah. So the kind of the crux of the story, which is what's so interesting, is that Esther, when she finds, she confirms the affair, has a heartbreak so big that in the style of great Italian opera, she dies of heartache.
Yeah.
And
In
the
a
only person who,
thunderstorm.
in a thunderstorm,
Yeah.
and the only person who can resuscitate her is, in fact, the very person who hurt her, which is the woman. And what you get at the very end is perhaps a resuscitation, perhaps not. It's an ambiguous ending, and the idea that we want the audience to kind of think of it for themselves. But what ultimately remains is the idea that peace is greater than love.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of the culmination.
And it's a wonderful opera. I can parenthetically say that with fabulous music, but that we'll talk about after. But
Thank you.
fabulous music.
Thank
And it
you.
was in a small theater that we could talk about National Sawdust, and therefore we audience members were close to the performers. And where I sat, was very close to the string section of two string players who were magnificent.
Yay, I'm
They were
so glad.
stunning, those two.
Oh, I'm so
And
happy to hear that.
because it's a small musical ensemble, but not small musically at all, and that's an important distinction to make. And but we'll get to the music after. But I wanted to discuss many things about that. But one is that most people are not aware, I think, of the Mennonite culture in the border area between Mexico, the United States. And I'm going to start by
Right.
saying, um, I adhere to a term I learned in Italy many years ago, senza confini, una grenza. In other words,
Mm,
without borders. That
yep.
borders are defined by politicians, by churches, by conquerors, and so on. But nature doesn't define the border. And a bird that flies from one place to the other, or a rabbit that scampers from one to the other, does not say, "Oh, I'm in Mexico now. Oh, I'm in the United States now. Oh, I'm in Italy. Oh, I'm in Austria. Oh, I'm in Slovenia. Oh, I'm in Switzerland."
Right.
They don't do that. The world is not built that way. And
No.
these definitions and differences that people make, I think, are deleterious. When I'm asked, "Are you an American? Are you an Italian? Are you a New Yorker?" No, I'm a citizen of the world. And that's not to say that I'm a cosmopolitan person. I may be, but the point is, I am as much a citizen of the world as every other person residing on this planet, not more, not less.
Yep.
And so, but within that, because of nature, because of history, because of religion, there are these, let's call them subcultures, these groups who exist that may not be known to the outside world. So
Yep.
we can talk about lost people in New Guinea or the Amazon, but a lot of people really don't know about this rather substantial community of Mennonites who live in the area of southern United States, northern Mexico.
That's
Um,
right. There, yeah, I mean, I think it's like mostly in Chihuahua and that which I love how you open the podcast. And and I think I haven't I mean, I want to say there's roughly 100,000 at this point
yeah,
of it's yeah, so there's about roughly 100,000 Mennonites living in northern Mexico. And because these are people who are relocating to kind of further the faith, they tend to be the most conservative, of Mennonites. So yeah, so that's just an interesting, thing. And generally they do learn Spanish, but they speak in Plattdeutsch
yeah.
and English.
I do want to commend the work of a writer, journalist, filmmaker named Patty, P-A-T-I. Her last name is pronounced Yinich, but it's Jinich. You know her?
No, I don't know her.
She won a James Beard Award recently for her documentary about this border area and focused on the Mennonites and on their
Oh,
culture and
I've
their
got to read
tradition.
this. Was this in the
And
Times by chance? Like,
it
was it a
was so it's
beautiful?
a video documentary,
Okay,
which I
okay.
saw. It's
I'll
been
need
on
to see it.
TV, but Patinich.
Let me just write it
And
down.
she speaks with a, I think, Mexican accent. So Spanish
Okay.
is her first language, but she's completely bilingual. And most food programming that we see tends to go to a famous chef or a charming older nonna grandmother,
Right.
and it's very pleasing and so on. But what Patty Yiddish did was she went and visited these Mennonites and watched
Huh.
them make their food and grow their food and store their food and make what's called Mennonite cheese, which apparently is a thing.
Oh
Um,
my God, I had no idea.
and it's a wonder. It's about 90 minutes. It's a wonderful program. And she does a lot about the border. And
Hmm.
in right now we are in the electoral season of the United States. Mexico recently got a new president, a woman, and
Yes. Very
all of
exciting.
this is always in flux. But there are certain basic values. If you go to the border, whether it's Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, of the nation of Mexico, the nation of the United States, there's so much more fluidity and there's so much more culture that's local that
Yeah.
people on the outside who argue and debate about it don't understand.
No, that's
And
absolutely true.
when I saw your opera Silent Light, if I didn't know, it could have been Nebraska or
Yeah.
Pennsylvania or
Yeah, it's
or
it's true.
Stuttgart.
It's true. And I mean, I think, what's interesting is what I really liked about staging it at National Sawdust, which, is this kind of very contemporary architecture, is the idea that the architect, you can't hide that architecture. And so it was this kind of very conservative, beautifully plain world inside this kind of, very architecturally forward avant-garde space. And I felt like that was also a further metaphor, if you will, for this society and how it coexists in the world. But for me, because the film was such a rich canvas, the main study I did was really on the kind of choral tradition of the
Hmm.
Mennonite culture, because I wanted to get into that four-part harmony. I wanted to get into, into the meaning, if you will, of that, since that's the only part in the movie where there's actually music as well. So it was a really interesting, yeah, exploration.
You are one of the founders of this theater, this group, this institution called National Sawdust. Number
Yeah.
one, it was founded 10 years ago. Where does the name National Sawdust come from? And number two, talk about the birth of this theater, this cultural organization.
Yeah, so I co-founded it with a gentleman named Kevin Dolan 10 years ago, as you mentioned. The name National Sawdust is on the building, pardon me. And when we started it, we had a terrible name for it. It was called Original Music Workshop.
Ah.
And which would always autocorrect to on my way. And so you could never text somebody where you were going because it would always say, I'm on my way. And one day, one of our board members said, I don't know why you just don't name it the name on the building. It's such a cool name. And it had originally been a sawdust factory over 100 years ago. And so we did. We decided, you know what? It's kind of a quirky name, but why not? The byproduct is the sawdust. There's, meaning to that. And at the time I was in my early 30s, I felt that it was such an opportunity to be part of something that was really about furthering music discovery, and potentially just attempting to give something back to the scene, in a generative way. And so there's a lot of commissioning, a lot of mentoring, and most importantly as well, the space is an acoustic, gem, and so there's
Yeah.
really great sound so that composers and musicians coming for their first performance will leave with an incredible recording, which is often one of the hardest things as a young composer, is that you just don't have good recordings of your work. So that was
And,
really it.
but if I'm correct, Silent Light, although you have been associated with the theater for 10 years, is your first piece there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why did you wait?
I mean, I think that at the beginning, there was the complexity of the board not thinking, you know, that this was, a vanity project. I wanted them to be, deeply understanding that this was not about me, that this was about a community. Um, and also where I was at that point, it wouldn't have looked good for me either to not establish myself outside of the organization that I founded. So even though it made it harder, I feel like there was more poignancy to wait until my career was more established, because it would have been much easier if I'd been like Philip Glass and starting an institution, or Robert Wilson, but I wasn't. I was starting off. I was obviously having a career, but there was a yeah, that was my reasoning. And also I think that it's a complicated place to be a functioning artist, in an institution like that, because you don't want to curry favors and you don't want to kind of continue the gatekeeping, which is the very reason why I started this space in the first place. And so I try to be very careful with how I insert myself and how I tend to just help with the fundraising and the strategic vision, and then really, try to keep a light touch so that it's a fair space.
So we have on this program on Adacho a worldwide audience. So I often will explain to listeners who might be in Zimbabwe or Quito or somewhere else, um, certain basic things. But National Sawdust is a small space, lovely space, in a neighborhood called Williamsburg in Brooklyn, which is an historic New York classic neighborhood. It's near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and my dad was a musician and he was in the Navy, but he fought World War II with his trombone, as
Oh
he
my
said.
gosh.
And they had a musical organization, and he was one of the lead performers during World War II as the ships came and went. And they would go, when they were building ships and building munitions, he would go and perform for the the workers, not
Fred, I
just the
have to
sailors.
tell you, I
Yeah.
have to talk to you because my next piece, one of the big five, is in the Navy Yard and it's about the history of the Navy Yard.
Oh, we'll talk. Okay. Very
So
good.
this is fascinating.
Yeah, I can send you a beautiful picture of my father there in his Navy
Please.
uniform with the trombone. Um, anyway, Williamsburg has an historically large, ultra-Orthodox Hasidic
Yeah,
Jewish community,
that's right.
which is kind of like the Jewish Mennonites, let's say, in that they're enclosed in their community, and it's a very vibrant,
Segregated.
culturally fascinating community with their own laws, their own food shops, their own bakeries. When I
Schooling.
schooling, everything. And when I go to Williamsburg, I tend to cross the border from the area where you were, National Sawdust, to the Orthodox area because it's like entering Warsaw 1925.
That's
And
right.
this is New York City. And then going and buying magnificent pastries that are really fantastic there. And then coming back to Williamsburg, the other side. And there are, arts institutions, galleries, a very good movie theater, a couple of good restaurants. And you have the New York Harbor, in effect, facing Manhattan. And it's really very old New York, but it's very contemporary. Half of it, the other half is the Orthodox Jewish. And
Right.
so it's for people listening elsewhere in the world to understand that when you're going to Brooklyn, so to speak, from Manhattan, whatever Manhattan means, you're not going backwards. You're going into history, but with an incredibly rich, diverse history. South of there is an area called Red Hook, which historically was Italian. And,
Right.
you go 5 blocks or 3 subway stops, and you're in a different world in that part of Brooklyn. There's a strong Polish neighborhood in Greenpoint. Everywhere you go within a short distance, everything changes.
It's
And
so true.
what makes New York distinct, let's say, from the border area of Austria and Italy or the border area of Mexico and the United States, is that you can go 5 steps and everything changes. Whereas in other places, there's a bigger commonality and a prevailing culture. But in New York, you have these microcosms that are just fascinating from one place to the next.
I'm
Um,
I'm curious I'm curious
yeah,
just to put a little pin on this, which is that we had a young gentleman who's a singer who is doing a 5-part podcast on Silent Light who's Mennonite. And he writes for a Mennonite newspaper in Winnipeg. And he came and he said that one of his greatest wishes was that we could perform this for a group of Mennonites. And I just think about like, how cool it would be to kind of really because we are segregated, like I actually live on South Ninth in Williamsburg. So 1 block further and you're literally in the kind of the most Hasidic neighborhood. And I
yeah.
just think, it'd be so amazing if through art we can actually kind of bring these worlds together. See if we got it right.
And what's so interesting is when you have people from those communities, whatever the community is, come and see artistic, I won't say evocations, expressions
Yeah,
of their culture, their
of their
world.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was
Because
definitely nervous.
that intersects with the factors of modern life,
Yeah,
whatever those are.
exactly.
So belief that women and men, but let's say especially women now, are entitled to all kinds of rights that they're not necessarily receiving.
Right.
I'm not a person who uses the vocabulary or say they were given their rights. No, they earned they fought for and won their
I fought
rights.
for them. Yeah.
Um, you were part of a project that I heard music of yours and of 18 other composers. Project 19 of the New York Philharmonic. They
Yep.
were very forward looking. I believe it was the conductor Jaap van Sweden who did this, and wanted 19 women composers because in 2020 it was the 100th anniversary of women finally getting the right to vote in the United States.
Exactly.
And it's called the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. And therefore, you were part of that. It leads to a question that is delicate, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I know where I stand, and I want to know what you think.
Okay.
I don't hear men, let's say Philip Glass or Gustav Mahler or Mozart, defined as male composers. Women who compose music are very often called women composers or female
Oh
composers.
yeah. Yeah.
And some people analyze their work through, let's call it a feminine, female prism, gaze, whatever you word. I don't like the word gaze in that context, but um, that somehow music composed by women has to be defined as music composed by women, whereas we
Hmm.
don't say that the male composers is music composed by men.
Right.
And if I go into a concert hall or an opera house and don't open my program and don't see who wrote the music, I don't automatically make assumptions and presuppositions about what the music will be.
Yeah.
And yet, it's very important that people in the world understand that classical music, all music, is not just the province of men in terms of creating it. Certainly, performing it, women have for a long time. But in terms of creating it, um, and yet I do understand advocacy is crucial. Where do
Yeah.
you stand on that?
Well, so I actually really, I mean, I think from what I just heard, I really agree with what you're saying, which is that I don't, you know, I let's just put it this way, like I don't really want to be known as a woman composer. I just want to be known as a composer. And I want the opportunities to come at me. But the reality is, because of the way, historically, the field has progressed, there still needs to be a lot of advocacy. And so that's kind of where I put my energy, is just like, okay, great, let's just break down these barriers. Things have changed in such a good way over the last 25 years since I was a student at Juilliard, when it was really complicated. And you could really palpably feel what it was like to try to, just get a chance, and not to, just, yeah, it was hard. So I see the field changing. I see it as exciting. I think women and, people of color, everyone needs opportunities. And so they're going to be part of any project that gives them that opportunity. But ultimately, the music is the music, right? And unless you're writing something very specific about your identity in that way, then I don't think that there's much to I don't think it's the most interesting aspect of the conversation, you know?
I've made a point always, but especially in the past few months, of having many composers who are women on this program. Mary
Thank you.
Watkins, Missy Mazzoli, Paola Prestini, Laura Kaminsky, others. And because I don't need to identify you as a woman because
Right.
people are watching. So therefore, most people are watching, some are listening. But
Right.
if I am talking to you about your music or about art, whatever, they see you're a woman.
Yeah,
So if
exactly.
that is their determination that, oh, that's a woman saying that, that's up to them. But I want it to
Exactly.
be second nature. I've had women who conduct. I'm not going to say women conductors. Women who conduct on this program. Famously, Marin Alsop, who's probably the most famous conductor who's a woman, but not only Marin Alsop, because I don't want her to be identified as the woman conductor.
Yeah.
Um, because frankly, it's the same thing with people who are black, people who are gay, people who are transgender, people who are Latino, Chinese, Italian, whatever they
Yeah.
are. I I understand that everybody comes from a background. So that your background is Italian. And you told me this wonderful thing I didn't know about Trent and polyphony, and one would learn that. Um, and and we can draw and enjoy and admire each other's cultural backgrounds. And if you don't know the Mennonites, seeing your opera Silent Light is a wonderful introduction. And then Patty Yenich's documentary. And we all learn and share with one another. But I'm concerned, and I'm not putting this on any single group or background, that when we label or we encourage people to find communities among people who seemingly are like someone else, if they're the same color, the same religion, whatever, um, that's limiting. It's not expanding. I said to you at the beginning, I consider myself a citizen of the planet and not of my religious background, where I was born, what I studied, what I speak. I don't adhere to any of that.
Yeah. I mean, again, I totally understand what you're saying. Oh, sorry about that. House duties. I totally understand what you're saying, and I think that, again, it's like I think people have different relationship to their identity in relation to the art that they put out, also in relationship to how complex their history and their background and past has been. And so I just, I think for everybody that plays very differently into the way they express themselves. And for some people, it ends up being the form of expression. And then that's what you talk about because that's what informs the art. But everybody's different, and I think again, I'm so grateful that the field is opening and shifting, and I just think that there's it's an incredible fertile moment in the music ecosystem right now.
And I began to say before that people see this around the world. I wanted to add, Paolo, I wonder if you agree or disagree with me. I think that right now the United States is the world center of new opera.
I mean, I think so. I think that it's a fascinating moment for the opera scene in America. I really do. I can say that confidently that like I just don't think there's as much going on elsewhere. Um I do think there's probably a lot going on in Britain, but I mean again, not to the extent of that we have work going on here.
So I don't want to give stuff away about Silent Light because I want people to see it. But
Thank
an
you.
email was sent out to people who are ticket holders advising about certain content. And I'm not going to address the content you think I'm going to talk about. They said that there'll be preparation of pancakes, bacon, and eggs. and because
Yes, it's
and
so funny.
because um, seats were not assigned, I arrived early because I wanted to look at the set and sit near where the kitchen was.
Right.
I
I'm sure you
really want.
smelled of bacon.
Oh boy, did I! and
That's funny.
but Brittany Renee, the soprano, is that her name? Yes.
Yeah.
Um, rather expertly prepared those pancakes,
Yes,
and
she sure did.
while singing, while doing everything else, I cannot. I'm a good cook. I cannot make pancakes like that.
I
And
mean, she did a great job, I have to say. Her and Maggie, the
yeah,
mom, they were just cooking up a storm
Maggie
there.
Lattimore. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they divided the kitchen duties, which was very interesting. And it was a rather large kitchen for a
Yeah.
small space.
Yeah.
And but I mention that because um, I suppose if one of the Orthodox Jews from the other side of Williamsburg came, they wouldn't want to be near the bacon. But I was interested in the extra sensory, let's call it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something just studying you, not knowing you because we don't really know each other, but studying you, I have a sense that you two are are aware that opera is not just music and words. It's not auditory and linguistic. It's many things,
Totally.
or it can be many.
Totally.
And the environment where I sat between the wonderful violinist and cellist on
Yep.
my right and the
The
pancake and the
bacon.
cookie going in front of me was exquisite because I really normally if you go to a larger theater, you have the orchestra pit, you have the players, and you hear a collected sound.
Yeah.
I heard the collected sound in that acoustical space because it came from both sides and behind, but I particularly heard the two string players, and I particularly heard the sizzling of the bacon,
Right.
and I smelled the bacon, but also the pancakes. I watched the making of it, not so it distracted me from the opera, not at all. It was completely integrated into the opera, as were the two string players.
Right. Oh,
And
that makes me so relieved because I have to tell you, I sat in every chair trying to balance that. And it was like, I had to just accept that there was going to be a little bit of a different experience wherever you sat because it's very hard to balance that kind of acoustic,
but that's
environment.
how it is anyway. Even the Metropolitan Opera House has wonderful acoustics, but 3,786 seats and
Yeah.
different sight lines. And I can say, having worked at the Met, but also sometimes sitting very close, that I can smell certain performers,
Oh, that's so
not in
funny.
a bad way, but I have an acute
Yeah.
sense of smell. And let me take this further because I really think it's something you care about. We're going to get to another one of your operas soon. Um, when I worked at the Met, there was a woman who came who had a lot of money. She was a very wealthy woman who was blind from nearly birth, and she had a series of German Shepherd dogs who were her companions. And she, because she had a lot of money, could sit anywhere in the theater. But I asked her, you don't have to sit in row A when you
Yeah.
can't see the production, and you have to go all the way up and down the aisle. And if you need the restroom, it's harder, although the dog knew where everything was. But she said, no, I take off my shoes and I plant my feet on the
Mm.
floor.
She felt the
I
reverberation.
feel the
Yeah.
reverberations and I
Yeah.
feel the singers. She particularly said Jesse Norman, but it could have been anyone, that she felt Jesse Norman's reverberation, vibration on her face,
Yeah.
that she could feel the orchestra playing. She could hear the theater behind her. She said the sound behind me is as important as the sound in front of me, which to
Mm.
me was a revelation because when I sit in opera house, or theater, I tend to focus on where the sound is coming from. We
Right.
obviously talk about not amplified sound, natural
Right.
sound. But she said, I hear the sound behind me as much. And if I'm sitting in the back of the auditorium, I don't get that.
I love that.
And
I love that because it paints a picture of how, people with different, different senses experience things in a different way. And to kind of bridge where I think you're going, but to bridge for Silent Light, I was really interested in painting a world through sound, through smell, through a very kind of very different kind of musical palette because, putting together trombone, you're putting electronics, the use of Foley. So what does the natural world sound like when you're, in a small space like that? And to really try to make you feel like you were outside, I did a lot of fun play with Foley.
would you
Um,
define what Foley is? Not everyone knows.
yeah, so I mean, Foley in this sense is like, well, I should know exactly, but it's an art form of coming up with different sounds to paint to paint certain sounds in a different way. So if you were in a radio play, for example, and you wanted to hear rain, you might hear rice on paper, and that would give you this this kind of live depiction, if you will, of a certain sound. And so for me, what I wanted to do was kind of play with the very, at times heartbreaking moments in the piece with also levity of seeing somebody make those sounds. So for example, there's a scene where the cows are being milked, and so I took two squirt guns, the incredible Foley artist Skip Shires who designed these, and we basically had him squirting water into two bowls. And so you see this kind of playful image with this very, intense. Or during the love scene when Marianne is pouring milk on Johann, you get a marble run with marbles, and we spatialize that, and all of a sudden this kind of sensual act of pouring milk becomes this explosion of sound. And so really heightening the senses, if you will, through these whimsical approaches to sound and smell and so on and so forth.
I have used the term about myself forever that people complain that they don't like how it sounds, but I don't care. Pleasure activist. And
I
when
love
I say
that.
pleasure
That's so
activist,
cool.
what I mean is I'm not a sex worker, not yet. But when people say to me, what does pleasure activist mean? And I say to them in all sincerity, it means what you think it means. But what it means to me is that I feel that one of our greatest gifts as humans, all of us, is we're endowed with the five senses. Most of us have five senses. And so that if we listen rather than hear, if we savor rather than eat or taste, if we really let our noses work full time, if every all the senses are engaged,
Yeah.
we live more fully. It also, frankly, makes us, I think, more intelligent and
I
gives
was just
us
going to say, yes, it gives them a
the,
complexity.
a sixth sense, the
Yeah.
intuition. When people say to me, why do you think the following? Well, it's based on my intuition. Well, where does that come from? It comes from being an animal in nature, which is what we
Hmm.
all are, um, and how we take in using our senses. And I I'm hypersensitive, which can be annoying sometimes, but it's also a real blessing at other times because I perceive things that others don't because I engage with it. I activate my senses, therefore pleasure activism. But I really feel that as a world, if we all engaged or learned to engage our senses and then did that, that we would treat each other with more kindness. We would understand and have more empathy about what someone else is dealing with. If there's a smell in a room, what does that smell mean? I mean, I have saved lives because I've smelled gas where other people haven't. And I've saved
Wow.
several lives now. I've smelled fires from far away and have gone to a building and reported to a doorman that I think there's a fire in your building. And they'd say, don't be silly. There was
And
always
there
a fire in
was.
the building.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
And I have tasted things that might not be good that tell other people don't taste them. So that's why I love the police officers in Trento who can
With the, yeah.
look at mushrooms and talk about that. Um, I love truffle dogs and truffle pigs and how they identify that. If we connect to nature and to one another and to everything around us, it can be exhausting, but it also is incredibly exciting and it's living at our fullest. So when that woman told me about hearing sound from behind her in an opera house, that opened up worlds to me about how we live.
How
And
people experience things differently.
right. And what I've come
Yep.
to believe and perhaps understand about your work is that what I just described is meaningful for you too.
Very meaningful. I mean, so one of the big things that I've been working on for 7 years is called Sensorium X, which is
Yes.
the term in Latin is at the seat of the senses. And it is a story written by the great poet named Brenda Shaughnessy, who also, like the story mirrored in the libretto, has a nonverbal son with cerebral palsy. And so we essentially designed this kind of very futuristic, beautiful story where the love story is really between a mother and a child, and the extents that she'll go to essentially save the child, who in the end ends up manifesting the escape of this sci-fi tale. And as we were kind of beginning to create it, it became very evident the world of opera is not really up to speed in terms of what it means to have an intersectional approach to disability. And so we began to look into the workshops and the processes of what it means to have somebody who's blind on set, somebody who has cerebral palsy, and how to
On the
kind of
set of the opera production, in other words, someone who's not playing blind but is blind.
exactly.
Yeah.
And what we might do to really kind of, create, if you will, a good working environment for that, um, to essentially paint a tale in the way it needs to be painted. And it's been an extraordinary experience. And it's finally coming to life this coming May in a field house in Omaha. And it's being directed by Jerron Herman, who's a brilliant choreographer, and Jay Scheib, who's really into technology and brilliant direction, who just did Bayreuth last year.
Mhm.
And there's also a sci-fi element, which is that as we began to work with different communities who have different speech pathologies, we began to understand that our phones don't really understand people with different, speech different ways of communicating. And so we partnered with NYU to create essentially AI that helps with those kinds of expressions, and that's kind of like a, a, a simultaneous path that I've been exploring all the way to when we open next May.
I'm going to just unpack a couple of terms for the international audience. NYU is New York University, and
Yep.
AI is not artificial insemination. I know we're talking
Nope.
about Omaha, Nebraska. What the
No artificial intelligence. Yeah,
um, and AI, artificial intelligence, is, to put it mildly, controversial because it's something that is evolving and developing in real time, and the larger world doesn't know what the people working on it are doing. And
yeah,
it's something like, Dr. Frankenstein, that it could be put to wonderful uses or terrible uses. And
absolutely.
so we don't quite know where to go with it yet. Um, I'm doing a wait and see on that because other technologies that were considered positive in the past have been put to bad use as well as good use. So I have not decided whether it's genetic cloning, all these different things have their virtues. But on the other hand, we need to have a consensus about the moral implications of what they are. I happen
It's
to be someone,
complex.
pardon me?
It's very complex.
Yes. As someone who's a pleasure activist, I really believe in what's innate in humans rather than giving myself and my life experience over to a machine, whatever the
Understood. Yeah.
machine is. And because, think of Leonardo Vitruvian Man, where he drew the man and understood human proportions. And the circle is that in Leonardo's view, I think everything that is the world fits within that. There are
Yeah.
other people who may think it goes beyond that and that the mind goes to places where the body and the tangible does not. Um, Opera has not always been great at representing people with disabilities.
It hasn't been great at all.
There's La Cieca in La Gioconda by Ponchielli, and there is Toby, who is, I hate the word, a mute who does not speak, in an opera by Menotti. And is it The Medium? I'm not sure, but I think of The Medium. And there's a lovely animal walking by. Hello.
Sorry.
That's no, don't apologize. I love pets. um, and not many more. There
Yeah,
might be a person missing a limb or things like that, but they have attached to them phenomena that may not be complete to the person, to the character.
or
And
Porgy, right? Porgy's also disabled.
Porgy, of course.
Yeah,
And so there's an issue that we don't have to solve right now, but I believe that if the Gershwins and DuBose Hayward, who created the character of Porgy, as the book was originally called, it was not Porgy and Bess, it was just Porgy. Um, that if this man has profound disabilities, we're not supposed to airbrush them away in a production and have him,
absolutely.
because I've seen many recent productions of Porgy and Bess where he has a limb, and that's about it. But part
I
of the
mean, yeah, I
drama,
couldn't agree
yeah,
more. And the truth is that we do such a disservice to, to not portray those characters by disabled folk who perform, because there are. And so to me, it's like it became such a incredible opportunity to put something forward that is done, hopefully, knock on wood, right, and that helps others see how it can be done. And then also for my own practice, to be thinking, and it's something I have to do and I want to do, just thinking more and more accessibility. I mean, we will all be disabled one day. That's the
yeah.
truth, Fred. I mean, that's what happens, it's like, that's, if we're lucky enough to grow old, we will all be disabled in some form. And so that kind of empathic way of looking at it, I think, is really crucial in order for just us to, to make it a more real stage, a more and a more fair stage.
So because you are born in Italy, um, when I lived there, had a rather large accident and was
Oh,
treated
wow.
and was disabled. And I suddenly learned, I came back from that, but it took a long time. Um, I learned about just the fact that in an old nation where it's built with staircases and stones and so on, it was not friendly to someone who could not get about on his own
Of
2 feet.
course.
Um, and I started reading up about disability and Italy, and in World War II and after, there were these institutions for the mutilati di guerra, people who
Mm,
were mutilated, it's the word,
yeah,
in war. And they
yeah,
might be called disabili, disabled, but they were mutilated was the prevailing thought. And I knew families who had learning disabled children or so on. And at the time, not now, thankfully, but at the time in the 70s and 80s, these kids would be locked away as if it were a shame.
mm,
And or if they were learning disabled, all kinds of disabilities, they were um, not out in public in a way. Older people who developed dementia might have been out in public more. If you know, one of my favorite films is Amarcord by Fellini,
Of
And
course,
there's
it's
a fellow
beautiful.
who's in a mental institution, and he Zio, the uncle, and they bring him out, and they have a family picnic in Romagna, and he climbs up a tree and he starts shouting, "Voglio una donna, voglio una donna, I want a woman." And they try to get him down from the tree, and it was so tender because
Yeah,
Fellini was so humane that he understood the emotions involved in that and the way they sort of brought him back to where he lived. But now that I think about it, Fellini had many characters who, in one way or another, were disabili.
yeah,
Gelsomina in La Strada, for example, and so many. And he embraced humanity. The more I think about it now, he really put it out there the way others did not in Italy. And but I was reading up about accessibility in Italy. Unlike Germany, say, where there was unfortunately a lot of bombing in World War II, they rebuilt their cities to be more accessible. In
right.
Italy, there was restoration in such a way that they were not accessible. And I found something that Mark Twain wrote, and it's not a word we use today, but I'll quote him, that Venice is a paradise for cripples. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is that there were no horse and buggies, no automobiles, no vehicles of any kind. And therefore, a person could move about. Yes, there were bridges, but without fear of being run over in traffic, and that you could live better in Venice. Um, it's something, having had that disability, that I think about every place I go. I literally watch every step I take.
Yeah,
And, when I came to see your opera recently, I had to find a seat where I could extend my left leg,
yeah.
which is the main reason I got there early. And then I wanted to sit near the pancakes, but it was really for that.
I get it. No, I get it. And I think like, just speaking about space as well is like that's also a consideration, is how do we make our spaces more accessible and more easy, so
Mhm.
that everyone can enjoy and participate in the way that they deserve. And I think that's ultimately we're talking about human rights. These aren't choices. They should not be choices. They should be things that we all participate in to make it better. And so I feel like in a small way for opera, this will be a big step forward to show what's possible, even down to Braille scores and what it takes and the kind of financial realities of that. To making rooms safe for people with different realities, and so it's been an incredible learning experience for me, and also has changed the way that I walk around in the world, and the way I see my work. And my hope is that moving forward, that I can adapt these practices into all the work I do.
Mhm. Um, you evidently, apparently, are very collaborative.
Yeah,
And the art form of opera, I think, requires collaboration. There are people who innately would rather sit alone in their studios and create
and
their
just write
music,
music. Yeah,
or paint their paintings, or write their books, or whatever they do, and do not see collaboration.
right.
Which came first for you, the collaborative instinct, and then you're bringing your art that way, or the art that was created to then have collaborators?
I mean, definitely the music comes first, there's no doubt. But from a young age, I was very passionate about other disciplines. And as I began to get more and more refined in those collaborations, I began to seek out collaborators who would bring out the best in me. I also see it as a way to grow, so it's like I'm learning about other people's practices, about timing. It affects the way. So, but it all began from the music, and now the way that I think through things is I think really intently on like the creative teams. If I'm producing something, and usually I'm co-producing in some element, I think about the kind of creative teams and what best way to bring forth an idea. So like for example, the opera that I'm doing at the Met Museum is a processional opera, and the director Luisa Proske is an extraordinary director who is actually in Germany, at Halle, and she had done a work before at the Met, and is very was very passionate about Mexico, and the theme is this proto-feminist Mexican nun, and my collaborator is an incredible Mexican singer. So really, thinking through these collaborations and creating good teams, and then sometimes they work better than others, and you learn, and that's just the reality of live theater.
And for listeners abroad in New York, we have three. We have Metropolitan Hospital,
Yeah,
we have the
that's right.
Metropolitan Opera House, and we have the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Right.
And depending how you swim in New York City, if you say I'm going to the Met, you automatically understand you mean the museum or you mean the Opera House.
That's
Somehow we
right.
get that without having to define.
That's
It's
right.
unusual, but it's true. And I go to both Mets. I've not been to Metropolitan Hospital except for one, thank goodness. But the other two, the other two are magnificent institutions. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I adore. And they have a very active performing arts program. I've spoken there on different occasions, and the Salzburg marionette troupe has come there, and all kinds of contemporary art has been uh, created there. And it's Limor Tamor, is that her name? Is
Lamore
the
Tomer. Yeah,
Tomer? Yeah, that's right. Julie Tamer, Limor Tomer, that's right.
that's right.
Um, is the current producing person. I knew her from New York Public Radio, and they have spaces in the museum, obviously, where art hangs or art stands. And I have been to operas and concerts and so on, not just in their theater, they have the Rogers Auditorium, but in the art itself.
That's right. And so did you see The Mother of Us All?
I
Did you see
did
that piece?
indeed. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's Louisa's piece. That's the piece that she directed.
Okay.
And and where we're doing this is actually in the cloisters, which is the part of the Met Museum, but of course all the way up,
Northern
up,
Manhattan.
up
Yeah.
in northern Manhattan. And so the way we're imagining it is a walk through the different spaces that tells the story of the ascension of the soul by this beautiful writer named Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz from the 17th century in Mexico. And it's a
Mhm.
piece that's never been done in her own words. And we're creating incredible wearable technology because, of course, we can't have anything hanging on walls or anything like that. So, really thinking through some creative and innovative ways to present opera, which is, I think, really exciting.
Yes. So that's three operas. The
That's
old
three.
man in the, the old man in the sea just came out on a recording. Uh,
That's right.
a perfect book, a novella by Ernest Hemingway. I
Perfect.
think a perfect book,
Perfect.
made into a perfect film starring Spencer Tracy. Um, it's a short book, but I'm not going to talk about it. You talk about the book and how it affected you, and what from the book you wanted to bring to the opera.
Absolutely. So I'd been obsessed with the book forever. It took me about 7 years to get the rights from the Hemingway estate. They had never really approved an opera. So finally, when they did, I partnered with Royce Vavrek, who's my collaborator in Silent Night, and this brilliant Slovenian director named Carmina Silic. And we decided that we would present something slightly different in
Mhm.
that we were fascinated both with the life of Hemingway when he was writing the book and of course the story. And so we take the story and condense it into several parts with moments in his life as he's writing. And he hadn't written in 10 years. He had had a writing block. He was actually quite ill. He had cancer, sun cancer. He also had a lot of different ailments and, of course, suffered depression. There was incredible richness in the novella that came from his life. So his obsession with baseball and DiMaggio, Marlene
Joe
Dietrich,
DiMaggio, great baseball player. Yep.
exactly, and Marlene Dietrich, the great actor, and the kind of love affair through letters that they had. And so through this, we created twin threads of both his life and the story. And you begin to see that there's a double between Hemingway and Santiago, who's of course the main protagonist, the old
The
man
old man. Yeah.
in exactly. And so that piece is actually dedicated to my father. My father is an amateur fisherman, and he also, not a man of words, um, doesn't doesn't express himself a lot. And so for a long time growing up, I wanted to understand him and my family. And in fact, I'm just looking here. I didn't even realize I had this here, but this is the only thing I have left actually of my father's family. And I didn't really get to know them. They were very enigmatic people. And we went to Iceland last summer where they would go fishing. And my dad told me that I could have this, and it was really cool because it was all the lures that my that they
Uh-huh.
used. fishing.
Wow.
So I keep it on my desk. It's a little reminder of the past. But I really wanted to write it, and I feel so, like it was such an honor to be able to put Hemingway's words to life, and to do it in a way that it was both sensual and playful. And I created a new character called Lamar, and the concept was, well, imagine that Hemingway's at a bar and he's having a drink and he's finally beginning to write, and he's telling the story to this bartender Lamar, and then the story begins to unfold and you get that opening writing paradise, and then it goes into the story. And it's written for the Phoenix Chorale, for unbelievable soloists, and Jeffrey Ziegler, actually, who's the cellist who you heard in Silent Light, who's also my husband. He's a great cellist, and percussion.
Um, Lamar, Lemaire, Il
Yeah,
Mare,
you
is
mad
that,
it was in all my work. Yeah,
in other words, the sea?
the sea. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think it was 2016, September, October. I was invited to Idaho, a place I'd never been,
Huh.
to
Okay.
work
Well,
at their opera
oh,
company, their lead opera symposia. And it was in Sun Valley. And I said, I will only do this if I can have some time to explore Ernest Hemingway, because he died there
so
and
you
he's
went to the
buried there.
house.
I went
Yes.
to the house. I had it to myself. Um, I visited his grave, but also
Mm.
they have a wonderful, wonderful public library. And let's hear it for
Mm.
librarians, especially in
Yes.
Idaho. A wonderful public library where I gave a talk. But yes, they acknowledge Hemingway there, but not only. It's a very diverse public library, and there are the spots where he went drinking and so on. But I asked people why it's beautiful there, but it's cold in Sun Valley, Idaho.
Yeah, I bet.
Why? And that he moved there from Cuba, where he lived, is because it was so humid in Cuba that his papers and documents were being ruined by the humidity. And
No
so he was
way.
advised to move
Huh.
to a very dry place. It's kind of like you going from Trento to Nogales, um, to a very dry place to preserve his records. And they're preserved
Wow.
there, as far
I
as
did
I
not
know.
know that. That makes a
And
lot of
that's
sense
why he
because
moved to Sun Valley,
that makes,
because
well, yeah.
going
And
from the beautiful fishing paradise in Cuba and Key West, where I visited home there,
yeah, I
um,
did as well.
yeah, with the six-fingered cats. Do you know
Yes.
about that?
Yes. No, I did. And I actually did the whole tour and saw the
For
cats
people who
and
don't know,
everything. Yeah.
Hemingway had cats who had six fingers, whatever they have, toes on each paw, and the great 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 grandchildren of Hemingway's cats still live there on the property and still have these unusual paws. But yeah, I never understood why he moved to
That
that
makes a
place
lot
in
of
Sun
sense.
Valley.
And in fact, in the opera, the ending of the opera, it's this really incredible moment where, unfortunately, it's the moment that he kills himself. But you get this incredible meditation, and you get to kind of meditate on the things that he really cared about, because he cared about the oceans, and he cared, he was incredibly passionate about these things, and those are all undercurrents, of course, in Old Man and the Sea as well.
And also in this season, we did Primero Sueño, which is at the Met Museum, the cloisters. The last one was The Fourth Crow.
Right. Well, actually, so I hate to say it, but there's two more. So there's the fourth crow is actually just in development, and that's
Okay.
exciting. It's with my friend Julian Crouch, and it's an
Okay.
interesting piece about Gifford Pinchot, who was the very first forest kind of the head of the Department of Forestry, and
Mhm.
his family has commissioned the work. But the two finished works are one which is called Portal, which is about the Navy Yard in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
and I really want to talk to you about that. Maybe offline one day.
Yep.
Um, sorry. Yeah, so I would love to talk to you about that. And that's with the Brooklyn Youth Chorus and Jad Abumrad, who created the amazing Radio Lab. And so
Before
we're
he created Radiolab, he was a young man who did a program called The Ring and I, about the ring cycle, that I
I did not
named.
know that.
I'm the I in The Ring and I. And
Oh
basically, I
my
took
gosh.
young Jad walking around and explained the ring cycle to him and his producer, Aaron Cohen, Eleanor Park, who you know.
Of
And
course.
um, we it's a 58.5 minute program that was a huge hit on NPR. And that is what brought Jad the attention that led to the program Radio Lab. But
Oh my
before that, we did the Ring
gosh.
and I for NPR for WNYC here in New York, and people could just enter on your computers the Ring and I. I think it's under Radio Lab now.
I'll have to, I did not know that.
Yeah,
That's so funny. So,
and
so Jad and,
basically, yeah, I was going to say
sorry, go,
that
no, no,
Jad
no,
is a
go ahead.
brilliant scientific mind. His father
Oh, he is.
lives in Tennessee, and it's I think, one of the developers of the COVID vaccine, if I remember. He comes from a scientific family.
He is exactly, I mean, he's such an incredible brain. And so, one of the things that we did when we started the project was really go through a deep kind of historical dive into the Navy Yard. And you really begin to see the Navy Yard as like this incredible nexus of change, you know. And so, we go into the oral histories of the Navy Yard, and it's all told through the voices of children in this kind of incredible immersive choral installation with the director, Jessica Grinstaff.
Yep.
And then the final is a monodrama with Cindy Sherman and R.B. Schlatter for Spoleto. So that's the
Spoleto,
season.
Italy,
It's
Spoleto, U.S.
Spoleto US.
Okay. South
Yeah,
Charleston, South Carolina.
that's right.
So if I were in Rome now, I would
Mm.
use my Italian gestures and say, "Ma come si fa?"
Come si fa a fare tutto questo? Okay, so I want to be honest that none of this was all written in 1 year. It's that COVID happened. And so I had these
Okay.
projects that were like literally ready to premiere. And then all of a sudden, it either delayed the process entirely or so basically, that's what happened. I mean, it just everything ended up converging. Like Untitled, the Cindy Sherman project was done in 2019. Silent Light was done in 2019. They just were pieces that were not picked up. And then, with Silent Light, I thought, well, 10th anniversary of National Sawdust, maybe I can do my thing, for the first time. Like what and so then it became like a banner season. But no, these were not works that I wrote at all. And Sensorium X I've been working on for 7 years because it's a self-produced work. I mean, co-produced with Beth Morrison, but no
Yeah.
major opera company. And so some of these things, just by nature of them not being picked up, um, it's like the universe finally said yes. That's kind of how I look at this. The universe finally said yes.
It's true. But you thankfully have a lot of acclaim and people who care about this art form are aware of you. But there are other people who are toiling in anonymity producing great work.
Yeah.
And, I'm thrilled that you're getting this it's a moment,
I
but
mean, I
it's a
am
moment coming 10
self-producing
years.
almost everything.
Okay.
So, I mean,
All right, but that's the answer for people who don't know Italian, come si fa. How do you do that? It
yeah.
can mean
So,
two
I
things.
mean, one
How do
second.
you
Sorry,
do it, or how
Tommaso,
dare you do
I'm
that?
on a podcast. Stop. Sorry, my son is going in and out.
That's okay.
Um, how do you do that? So I started my own company, which is different from National Sawdust, called Vision into Art. And
Hmm.
through that company, I raise funds for my own work, usually through places like the Mellon Foundation or the Ford Foundation. And I develop a lot of this work on my own with a team. It takes a lot longer because we're small, and then I co-produce with sometimes with opera companies, sometimes with presenters like the Met, and it helps bring work to life because the onus is not entirely on the presenter or the commissioning body. And so I think for a lot of young composers, like to understand that like we have to have a hand in creating our own work, because otherwise if you wait, you might only express yourself once every 10 years, and maybe that's okay. But I think for most people they want to put their work out there more. So for me, a lot of this was self-producing and really, sai, mi do da fare. I don't stop,
Yeah.
and I think about it from the philanthropic side to the foundation. I think about the whole picture, if you will. And I've been very fortunate to kind of learn how to do that over the last 20. I started my company when I was at Juilliard, so it's been, since 2001 that I started my first
Mm.
company. Yeah,
But the come si fa, how do you do this? Embedded in that question is also how, not just the ability to raise funds and organize and all of that, but the creative mind, the person who's studying music, looking at texts, finding inspiration in the writings of a nun from the 17th century,
yeah,
seeing a film and thinking that could be an opera.
yeah.
Um, just walking down the street and something like a lightning bolt hits you. I once had that with a book where I was walking and the lightning bolt hit me and I had to sit down. I had a pad and I started handwriting everything I could at that moment because I didn't know how long that would
It would,
last.
right.
And I had to sit for hours in, sort of a bus stop. But it was the only thing I could do because I had to do it that moment. But sometimes one cannot defer creativity. You have to grab it when it
Yeah.
hits.
Yeah.
And if you have a busy life, you have family responsibilities, you are a creative artist, but you're also a business person and you're also a
I mean,
producer and a
I,
collaborator. That's why that was part of my question of collaboration, because frankly, I work alone because
yeah,
I love people, obviously, but in terms of my creative life, I
right.
tend to be alone. And there's no
I
right and
guess
wrong, but it's just
there,
different.
yeah, I mean, that's personality. For me, like a lot of the work that I like to do is macro work. It's work that requires large collaboration. And so that's kind of how I've learned to create, is balancing a lot of different voices, but hopefully it still sounds like me. But like really yeah, really opening up these processes to create work that hopefully pushes the genre forward a bit. And so I've learned to do that. The business side, I would venture to say that probably because, my family, we were immigrants, that a lot of the kind of things that I saw in them as these kind of, really struggling, independent. My mom was ended up being a single mom and starting her own business. And so I think I just saw a lot of that kind of effort and whatever I don't know, I kind of learn. I tend to ask a lot of questions. Like anytime I'm faced with a really complex scenario, I don't make decisions right away. I kind of assess situations. I ask a lot of questions. I ask advice, and
Mhm.
then eventually I tend to move forward, obviously still making mistakes, but learning. And I guess that kind of that growth has been very slow and cumulative. I would say that yes, right now at like my late 40s, I'm finally having a moment. And I think it's important for people that are young to understand that, which is that the patience it takes and the perseverance it takes is to just believe in yourself and that refinement of craft, especially if you're doing things that are kind of complex, takes time. And if you believe in that, it only gets better.
People always ask me, what do I love about Italy? And they think I'm going to say La Dolce Vita, the pasta, all that different stuff. I love the Italian work ethic, and that seems to run against the
What people
perception
think.
of dolce far niente, of just, sitting in a cafe and eating a gelato and
Right.
watching the world go by. The Italians I know really work hard.
Thank you.
Um,
I agree.
Cesare Pavese, I think, wrote a book about working.
Yeah.
And the Italian Constitution, I should know it in Italian, I don't. The first line of the Italian Constitution is Italy is a nation founded upon work. I love
Mm,
that.
I
Compare
love
that to
that.
the American view of, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident and about freedom. I believe in that. I believe in the French view. I look at South Africa's constitution is pretty special. They need to live it more, but it's a great constitution. But only Italy, of all countries, would say Italy is a nation founded upon work. And
Yeah.
that says so much about the Italy I know, with the Italians I know, and this ability to create, to do, to encounter obstacles and then be creative to get around them rather
I
than
love
bang
that.
your head against the wall.
Yeah.
And
And just to keep going. It's like,
yeah,
the challenges, that's life. I
yeah,
mean, every day there's a challenge and like understanding when you need to take a break and when you need to recalibrate, but also just understanding that like you're in it for the long haul, and that's how you build a career. And that's also how you don't fall apart when you have your first failure, or many failures. It's like you just keep, you keep going. And I do strongly believe in what you just said, which is that it's you work, and this is the work. The work is
Paola
the fun is in
Prestini.
the process.
Yep, there are many. I know there are many things I could ask you. You're busy. I'm busy. Did I leave anything out? What I should have asked you.
I know, I really, this was beautiful. I like also I learned so much, so I think that's just I love the way your mind works. I love that we ended on constitutions. In fact, I should say that on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I'm doing my next opera, which is in 2 years, because who, can't stop writing opera, for Spoleto, and it's a big, beautiful piece called
Oh,
"Die Silent." So that's with Robin Cost Lewis, the poet, and the great filmmaker Ava DuVernay. So that'll be my next
wow.
big opera 2 years from now.
Actually, there is something else I wanted to ask you because I know that I was talking briefly about Fellini, and who I worked with. I knew him.
Oh my God, I did not know
Um,
that.
yeah, and I knew Nino Rota, who was his house composer, so to speak.
Yeah,
And but I know you're interested in collaborating with Luca Guadagnino. Am I correct?
it's a dream.
The Italian film
Yeah.
director. Um, what Fellini did that was magnificent was that he would sketch his ideas on paper. He would
Hmm.
do atteggiamento, movement of the characters. He would have faces that he envisioned even before doing the casting. He would have some sense of the costume. He would write out his concept of the sceneggiatura, the screenplay. And then he would go to Nino Rota and he'd say, okay, compose.
Wow.
And unlike most film directors, although Spielberg does this somewhat, Fellini would take the music that Nino Rota composed and then build the film around the
Yeah.
music.
Yeah.
When you watch La Strada, there's this trumpet solo that filters through the whole movie. We can think of many other Fellini films, especially Amarcord, but not only, where
I want to
music.
do Juliet of the Spirits. That's my Fellini
Okay,
film that I want
good
to
luck. That's the one film I said to him, Federico, ma non ci capisco niente. And Julieta Messina's wife, it was his first film in color, and he
do.
did it for her. And
Oh,
I said to her, "Do you understand?" No.
it's so
It's a
beautiful.
beautiful film, but it's
It's hard.
surreal. Nothing wrong with surreal, but
Yeah,
it's just different even from the other Fellini films.
it is.
But
It is.
anyway, I guess my question is the way that Fellini worked with Nino Rota of giving ideas and then asking the composer to compose and then integrating the music. The director would integrate the music that was composed and adapting his film, her film, to the music, which is part of Fellini's
I love
process.
that.
Um, would you propose that to Luca Guadagnino?
Well, I mean, one of my dreams is one day to have my music adapted to film. So I would love that. What I'm most interested in, I think it was Guadagnini and then Paolo, the one who did
Florentino?
Paolo Sorrentino was, and I'm working on it right now, is getting the rights to My Brilliant Friend.
Oh,
And that's kind of one of my next things. So it's really what I love about both of those directors, they're so visceral. They have these like complete visions. They understand music and how to place music in the films in the most visceral way. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm the kind of person who could do a film score and just be assigned like write like this. Like that's not my dream. But collaborating on something like that's a bigger vision would be a dream, with
I
these
do
two
like in
brilliant
some
Italian.
Italian films and maybe other European nations. In the older films, it's not called the score, it's called commento musicale,
Oh, I
musical
love that.
comment.
That's
And
amazing.
the way the composer who has seen the film, the footage, and read the text, not the libretto, um, comments on the film with music.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's what I could do. Like
So
if it
maybe
were a
your
real
memoir will be
collaboration.
entitled Commento Musicale.
Commento musicale, mi piace. I'm gonna take
Coi
that.
funghi.
Coi funghi. That's funny. Well,
With
one of the
mushrooms.
great books is the John Cage mycology book, the book on mushrooms. So,
I don't
there's a
know
lot
that.
of history on composers and mushrooms.
Really? Well, there
Yes.
is the opera Lady Macbeth of Sense by Shostakovich, where there's murder by mushroom. Have you ever seen
Oh,
that?
I have
Oh.
not. I have not. All right.
One of the great murders and death scenes in all of opera is that one.
Oh my
Because she's
gosh,
cooking, it's the same thing. She's cooking in a pan on the
yeah.
stage, and her awful father-in-law, who is just, she can't stand him anymore. She plunks down a big plate of fungi that are not edible because she's had a rat poison. Um, and he dies a brutal death on stage, where it can only happen in opera.
Oh my God. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I love this art form. Like this is the best, you know?
The way Anna Russell said, in opera, you could do anything you want so long as you sing it.
There you go. There you go. I love that. I love that.
So, Paola Prestini, thank you very much. Grazie infinite, buon lavoro.
Grazie a
And
te, Fred.
I look forward to seeing more of your works and hearing and smelling and tasting more of your works.
Thank
And
you.
that everyone, whether it's in Nebraska or the Met Museum or Spoleto or wherever in the world they are, Paola Prestini, you're one to watch, as they used to say.
Thank you. I
Thank
was so
you.
happy, so happy. Thank you.
Okay.